Johann Sebastian Bach published the Goldberg Variations in about 1741. What brought him to the decision to compose and publish this music? It probably had something to do with an event that took place many decades earlier, and that was his move to Leipzig on May 22nd, 1723. Bach arrived that day at 2 o'clock in the afternoon with his family to become the new cantor of the St. Thomas Church. Before this, Bach had spent most of his career serving the needs of noble patrons in Weimar and in Curating. And as a Hofkapellmeister or a Konzertmeister or court organist, his job was to serve the needs of these noble families, the musical needs. His job was effectively to make them look good with his musical talent. That when the prince's guests came to Curating, they would hear Bach perform and think, that's a fantastic musician. What an amazing prince that has the power and the money and the taste to hire somebody like that. In 1723, though, he moved to Leipzig to become the Thomaskantor, the cantor of St. Thomas, and the director of music for the city of Leipzig. And as a city music director, he was responsible not for serving the needs of individual aristocratic patrons, but rather for serving the musical needs of his entire community. Every Sunday, he performed a cantata in the churches of Leipzig, and the churches were filled with sometimes 3,000 people who all were effectively his peers. You know, there were different levels of society. Some were soldiers standing at the back and day laborers and such, up to people that were more elevated than Bach, mayors and wealthy merchants and such. But effectively, he was working for his peers. He was serving the needs of his musical peers. So he moved in 1723. It was a big transition in Bach's life from private to public. He was serving in the private situation, he was serving the needs of individual people, and in the public circumstance, he was serving the needs of a very large community. And it was a short step from this sort of change in his mindset. It's a short step from performing cantatas for thousands and thousands of anonymous people to publishing music for thousands and thousands of anonymous people. Because all you needed to get this music was a little bit of money. They were not cheap, actually, the prints that Bach was selling of the Goldberg Variations, but they were available. All you needed was money. You didn't actually have to know Bach personally or have some special status or anything like that. You just needed money. And Bach arranged for all of his published materials to be sold in Leipzig and in many other cities, and they were purchased by people that he did not know personally. So after Bach decided to publish some of his music, after he moved to Leipzig in 1723, he had to decide what to publish. He had already at this point written most of the music that we know. The Brandenburg concertos were already finished, the violin sonatas and partitas, the cello suites, the chromatic fantasy and fugue. Almost all of the organ music that he would ever compose was already finished. Many cantatas were already finished. But when Bach decided to publish, he wanted to publish different music, not the old stuff that he'd already composed. He completed that set, the keyboard partitas, and published them together in 1731. He then published the French Overture and the Italian Concerto in 1735, and a group of organ works in the later 1730s. And then finally, in 1741, or around 1741, the Goldberg Variations. This was the music that Bach wanted us to know. He wanted his own reputation to be based on this music that went out into the world, was very widely distributed. And ultimately, I think he wanted also posterity to know him by this music. Of course, we know today also works like the Well-Tempered Clavier, and as I said, the Brandenburg concertos, many other famous pieces that existed only in manuscript during his lifetime. But he didn't really expect us to know that music as much. He expected and wanted us to know him and his musical character by the works that he published.
There is no doubt that Bach has reached peaks in composition that nobody else has, and probably never will. His music is a challenge both for the performer and for the listeners. For a keyboard player, his works are a source of immense pleasure, but at the same time are extremely difficult to perform. The Goldberg Variations represent the Olympus of the works for harpsichord and actually for keyboard instrument. You could spend a whole life on this collection only. Every time you play or you look at one variation, you find something new. Like every other piece by Bach, there are different layers. You may enjoy the piece as a whole, or you can focus on one melody, only one voice. Perhaps you can then follow how the different voices interact with one another, or you even discover a canon. At some point you might think, oh, there is a new element. However, when you really look at it, you realize it's only an elaboration of the theme. It's like a never-ending metamorphosis.
It made sense to publish keyboard music, not just because Bach himself was a great keyboard virtuoso, but because keyboard music was portable. All you needed to play keyboard music was a keyboard and a player, an individual player typically. So that's not true of orchestra music, for example, or cantatas, where you need an ensemble and a choir and soloists. Most people did not have access to an orchestra or a chorus. Or good soloists, and so for that reason they couldn't perform his cantatas. There was no point in publishing the cantatas because he would have sold very, very few copies. Whereas keyboard music was portable, it was a way of encompassing his style and representing his what he wanted to express in a very small and portable and relatively inexpensive form that people could then buy and play at home. Keyboard music in this time was also very, very important socially, so that the clavichord or the harpsichord or the organ, these were very typical instruments to have at home. And many, many households had instruments like this, so that it was very common for daughters in particular to learn to play the keyboard and to entertain guests at home, and in this way make themselves more marriageable, and for young men also to play the keyboard or to play other instruments, to make music together, to socialize in this way. And in that way, it made sense also for Bach to reach out to his anonymous consumer base and offer keyboard music as opposed to, say, violin music or trumpet music or something else. What did people actually think of it in his time? Did it do what he wanted it to do? That's a difficult question to answer because we don't know a lot about who actually bought this music or who made manuscript copies. But what we do know suggests a sort of mixed reception. On the one hand, people were very enthusiastic about this music because it's obviously very, very skillfully written music. Really, anyone can recognize that. But not everyone thought that showing skill in composition was the most important goal for a musician. Bach was somewhat less interested in catering to the tastes of his potential buyers than were many of his contemporaries, like Christoph Graupner or Georg Philipp Telemann, who published also, and really tried to aim to adjust their own style, their own compositional approach to a mass market. And Bach really didn't do that. Bach was an unusual person insofar as he was obviously a great musician, and he simply did not like to write music that wasn't maximally interesting to him. He had to be fascinated by the music. It had to be at a level that was really fascinating for him, for him to get interested in doing it at all. So the idea of writing music that was sort of a dumbed down version of his own personal style, or something, writing music that was below his own interest level, was constitutionally impossible for him. He just couldn't bring himself to do it, apparently.
Bach planned all of his works very carefully before writing them, or even while writing them, and once even while the work was in the process of being printed, Die Kunst der Fuge. The older he got, the higher the bar was set. With the Goldberg variations, he challenged himself in writing a set of variations, of 30 variations on one area. Every third variation should be a canon, and the following canon would rise one step. So if variation number 3 is a canon at an unison, variation number 6 would be a canon at the second, and so on. Sometimes he even reversed the canon, like in the variation at the fourth, if the first voice goes like this, da 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 dum, the second one goes like da 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 dum. So it's mirrored. You would think that the result would be something very abstruse or complicated. The magic is that everything sounds perfectly beautiful. In fact, it's hard to believe that there is such a complex pattern behind it.
So he ended up writing music that was above the playing level of most amateur musicians, and above, frankly, the listening and sort of appreciation analysis level of most of his contemporaries as well. And this led to a kind of mixed response to the music. So on the one hand, professional musicians and people who really were in a position to be able to evaluate the quality and analyze it carefully really loved it, and they saw Bach as an absolute hero. But for the masses, most of the people who were in the market for a new group of keyboard compositions to play, most of those people seem to have been much more ambivalent about this music. They were kind of frustrated that it was so difficult to play and so difficult to understand, such that sometimes there's an exemplar of the Klavierübung Part 3, a group of organ works, where Bach says on the title page, this is for the refreshment of the spirits. And someone in the 18th century crossed out refreshment of the spirits and wrote in, for the entertainment of the eyes and the injury of the ears. Because this music, from that person's perspective, was much more interesting to analyze on the page than it was to actually listen to. Me personally, and I think for many people who love this music, it's not just rewarding to analyze on the page. It really is interesting to listen to. Bach does a wonderful job of hiding all of his learning and still bringing out melodies and a very sort of mellifluous texture, even when the music is in canon. So every third variation in the Goldberg variations is a canon of one sort or another, and you would really never know it unless you go in and analyze the music, because it's so smooth. It doesn't scream learning, this is a canon. He hides all of that in a very skillful way. Another thing that he does is he varies the music, the aria, fundamentally, so that with other composers like Graupner or Telemann or Handel, one has the sense in variations that it's kind of like a person who is just putting on different clothes, that cosmetically there are changes, but that fundamentally it's the same person there. And with Bach, in the Goldberg variations, I have the sense when listening that it's much more like the person herself, the actor, changes. That is, she is so skillful at portraying a different role that she can be an old man in one scene, and then a little girl in the next scene, and a fishmonger in one scene, and then a soldier in the next. And the change is so fundamental that you barely recognize it as the same person, even though the costume may actually stay the same. Bach, in the title page of his first collection of keyboard music, the keyboard partitas, he describes the music as containing galanterien. That is, if you're looking at the title page and you're trying to think about whether to buy this collection or not, Bach is promising galanterien, and by that word he meant effectively music for entertainment. But then people who actually bought that collection, went home and put it on their music stands and tried to play it, realized very quickly that this was extremely difficult music to play. And it really raises this interesting question of what was Bach after? It seems to me that this was entertainment for him, that this level of engagement, of hard work, of the rewards of putting a lot of effort into something, that was character building for him. It was something that he wished on the world. He was sort of offering to the world music that was entertaining for him, and he hoped would be entertaining for everybody else. But it was a kind of an imaginary world that he was living in, where everyone loved music like this, you know? And in reality, of course, not everyone loved music like this. Not everyone was capable of rising to the challenges that he presented. And that sometimes frustrated them, but it suggests that Bach was a kind of idealist, that this was the music that he wanted, he wished very deeply would entertain everybody, but there was a fundamental disconnect then between his own views and the views of his contemporaries. Why is this collection of variations known as the Goldberg variations? They were not known by that name during Bach's lifetime, as far as we know. The name comes from the first biography of Bach, which appeared in 1802, and it was written by a man named Johann Nikolaus Forkel. Forkel writes in that biography that we have a certain Hermann Karl von Keyserlingk, Count Keyserlingk, to thank for the existence of these pieces. He allegedly spent a lot of time in Leipzig, and he had a musician in his entourage named Johann Gottfried Goldberg, who was young. He was born in 1727, so he was only 13 years old at the time the Goldberg variations were published, or around 13 years old. But he worked for Count Keyserlingk. He'd studied with Bach, and Count Keyserlingk apparently, or allegedly, told Goldberg that he wanted him to play some music on the harpsichord that would help Count Keyserlingk fall asleep, because Count Keyserlingk was an insomniac, and Goldberg, his job in part was to play some music late at night to help the Count relax and then fall asleep. And Count Keyserlingk then is said to have come into contact with Bach and requested that Bach write some music for Goldberg to play, since Goldberg was Bach's student, that he would then be rewarded for. And Bach came up with a variation form and allegedly composed the Goldberg variations in this context. It's strange then that the publication doesn't have any reference to Keyserlingk on it. You'd think that if the whole origin of this piece was rooted in Count Keyserlink's suggestion, that Bach would thank him for it and publish this music with his name on it. And that didn't happen. There is no dedication in the publication of the Goldberg variations, and certainly no reference to Goldberg or Keyserlingk or anybody else. It just says aria with 30 variations. Probably what happened, and I'm hypothesizing here, but probably what happened is that this piece does have its origins with Count Keyserlingk and his Goldberg, the musician who studied with Bach, and by the way also composed very much in Bach's style, even more than Bach's sons composed in Bach's style. Goldberg really imitated Johann Sebastian Bach. That probably Bach wrote this music initially, maybe the aria, maybe a few variations in this context for Count Keyserlingk, for Goldberg to play, or that there's some connection there early on, but that when it came time to publish this music, he wrote, let's say, 27 more variations and really expanded the piece and then turned it into a self-standing, sort of self-contained publication that had, in Bach's mind, very, very little to do with Count Keyserlingk and trying to fall asleep. That's just my own little personal theory, but I think that is the only way I can connect all the dots and make this sort of add up to a logical conclusion.